Good evening, good day, good whatever it is, whatever time you may be listening to this if you're not currently watching this. My name is Jessica, and with me is my co host.
I'm Kelsey. Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day she said. Hello. Oh,
I'm an autism mom, um, and I got together with my friend Kelsey, who is what's RBT
a
again?
registered behavior technician.
Yeah, we got connected through ABA for my autistic son. And so now we're trying to bring all of you some information on autism. So you actually taught me something I did not know a couple weeks ago.
Hmm.
Um, I did not know, and I guess maybe this is our question to our audience. Did you know that the definition for autism spectrum disorder for educational diagnosis is actually different for every single state, and there is no federal definition when you talk about the I.D.E.A. And my mind is like drawing a blank as to what that stands for again. Intellectual Disabilities
Indi-
Education Act.
yeah, so it's Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
There we go. Individuals with. Okay. So yes, on I don't know, a lot of us as autism specialists, moms, caregivers, family members do not like to think of it as a disability, but a different ability. However, for what we're talking about in this podcast, we will be referring to it as a disability because that is how it is defined in
Mhm.
order to have an educational um, definition and help within the school system.
Yep.
So, um, okay, so explain why the educational diagnosis is different from a medical diagnosis.
So
Because we
you have
know
a
that
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
our medical diagnosis, I ran across a friend of mine, and he let me borrow. He had a DSM-5 because he's studying to become a counselor, and he's required to have that. So the medical diagnosis uses the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5,
Mm-hmm.
along with some other tools like Curtis. They use the DSM-5. They used another test called the ADOS-2, and it was a lot of paperwork to fill out. And when you're getting an educational diagnosis, it's still a lot of paperwork to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
And you, now you're an educator, so you get to keep track of a lot of that paperwork.
That I do. That I do. It's a lot.
Yeah, yes. That's why we have our binders. We love
Yes.
our binders.
Yes, I actually have one, and it's with all my document for each and every student that I teach, with every paperwork clipped to it.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Okay, so tell us all how the educational diagnosis is different from the medical diagnosis of autism.
okay. So medical is normally how it affects your everyday life.
Mhm.
Pretty much it's providing a label so you can get outside sources.
Mhm.
Well, what happens if your kid is starting sixth grade, preschool, and all the way up to 21? Well, that's a lot of schooling.
Right.
So we're going to look at the term, and the key term is educational.
Mhm.
Educational, meaning you are educating somebody. You're sitting in a classroom and you're taking what the teacher's telling you, or anybody that matter who's teaching you. So what
Okay.
an educational diagnosis is, yes, you have this medical diagnosis, but does this medical diagnosis, such as autism, affect your ability to learn in the classroom? And that's key.
Mhm.
Because if you do have a diagnosis of autism, is it really impacting his or her learning? Can he
Right.
learn without accommodations? Can he learn without modifications? Can he sit there like a typical neural developing child, or does
Right.
he need help? Well, if he
Mhm.
needs help, then you're going to have to go through that process and get that educational diagnosis so he can get the services in the school and receive that. With that being said, I remember sitting on an initial IEP when I was a severe educational teacher, which I taught the severe, meaning that even if you're 6 years old, you're on a mental capacity of a kid, preschool or even a 6-month-old. So you're really lagging almost 6 years behind, which is okay. I absolutely love them. They have the hugest heart. With that being said, I had a 6-year-old come in the summer, went over and attended a meeting with the psychologist and the board, special board services. So the special services board director, and met up with them. They're like, hey, we've done our evaluations and we've determined that her disability actually affects her education. She can't write, she can't keep up, she doesn't know how to speak. And some of all these severe characteristics of her disability did impact her educational learning. So therefore, we said, okay, this is your educational diagnosis. We're going to have to provide you services within the school.
Right. Now, I actually personally had the opposite of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So, and I get to tell you all the what happened with my son. We went in and I have had him tested, and actually we just retested just to be sure that everything was okay. So he has a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis of sensory integration dysfunction is what they're calling it now. Sometimes it's also known as sensory processing disorder. And this can cause, that's where you have your sensory issues, your sensory input that you need, or if you're sensory seeking, all that kind of stuff. Well, he has a lot of sensory needs. And however, those sensory needs, they determined through an OT would come in, occupational therapist. We'll start our little dictionary here that we'll have. But the occupational therapist would come in and they would do a diagnostic testing. And usually his would come back that he didn't require anything other than accommodations. So he didn't get, so he could not have an occupational therapist would not come into his class, into the classroom and help him, or he would not go to the sensory gym to have like a set time because it was not required. It didn't impact him educationally beyond needing breaks and basically what would be determined as accommodations versus the actual time in the sensory gym. So that was frustrating, but we then did learn how to give him breaks and stuff like that within the classroom itself.
So you're manipulating that environment without having to remove him from the environment. And that's key. That's key because they will look at that. Can your child be in an educational classroom setting without having to remove him to be able to help them out? And that's different than resource. Resource, you're only struggling with one subject. Okay, we're going to pull you out and give you some of those services. Even then, you still have to have an educational diagnosis. With that being said, I really like how you brought that up because the biggest one that a lot of people get confused in that you don't need an educational diagnosis is a 504 plan, which is underneath the I.D.E.A. But a 504 plan is a plan developed to accommodate the special needs with a handicap. So, for example, I am actually deaf in one ear. And with that being said, growing up, it didn't impact my learning. I could keep up, but what they had to do was they had to accommodate me and put me in the front of the classroom. And I think Curtis would had a 504 if he didn't have that educational diagnosis of autism. And he would have had, okay, we're going to give you a 504 for the sensory, make sure you incorporate breaks and things like that. So there is a difference. So what we're talking about with the I.D.E.A. and the educational diagnosis is going into deep and farther. which bases off this spectrum. Everything's a spectrum. So you
Right.
have what is called the least restrictive environment. And
Okay.
within the school system, you always start at the top where you do not have
Mhm.
any accommodations, you don't have any modifications, and normally what it looks like is a general education classroom.
Okay, so that's for your neurotypical
Mhm.
um, person, which is
Correct.
that would be my daughter. She's
Correct.
neurotypical.
Right. And then also you're going to have your 504 plans with built
Mhm.
underneath that. So it's a subcategory underneath the gen ed. Then
Mhm.
from there, they're going to determine, okay, your child still has some needs some more accommodations or needs a little
Right.
bit more help. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull them out maybe for just speech or maybe pull them out
Mhm.
for just English, which is considered resource. So
Okay.
even if your child has OT, PT, you're still considered underneath the LRE,
Right.
special services, or resource.
Right.
Okay. Then it goes farther. Oh, you can't operate on these two, and you still keep coming up. You're almost 4 or 5 grade levels behind. We can't
Mhm.
keep going. We've tried everything we can. Now we're going to put you in a self-contained classroom. And with
Right.
that self-contained meaning you get taught on a modified curriculum and you get taught all 4 subjects normally by one teacher depending on how the school is set up because sometimes they
Right.
switch in between self-contained teachers. But
Mhm.
meaning you have one teacher all day and you only go out for lunch and things like that. So you can get
Mhm.
those more in depth
Mhm.
help.
And
Um,
that's what you currently do, correct?
Correct. I currently teach a self-contained classroom. I absolutely love them. I have to brag on my kids. My kids are coming such a long way.
That's awesome.
Today, I know I'm going to get sidetracked, but today I have to brag. They sat and rapped a song about telling time, and their creativity was phenomenal because I teach 6th through 12th and all different ranges of disabilities.
Oh,
And
wow.
for them to come together, a group of
Mhm.
20, just to come together and sit there and like tell me what a minute hand does and what an hour hand does and tell me what time it is, I have to brag about them. So
Well, that's
I'm sorry, but
well,
yes,
that's
that's what I
cool.
do now.
Yeah,
So
but I mean, we've got to and that's one of the things that helps within the school and the education. And as an autism mom, what I had to do is I had to find whatever it is that kinda helps Curtis to adapt or help him learn whatever it is. I mean, like, one of the things I do now, even though I do a virtual online school.
okay.
Um, and even though he has the curriculum, I have access to the textbooks and everything, because I'm what's called a learning coach, and so I get access to all that information, but I find that just sometimes for him, just reading a book, he doesn't have that comprehension can be a little bit more difficult, and so he doesn't quite get all those big things about, say, right now, I mean, we're 6th grade health, and we're doing the systems of the body. And so, how am I gonna get him to memorize that the heart is part of the cardiovascular
Right.
system and what have you? So, in this instance, pictures help.
Yep.
So, I
That's it.
help make him I found something on, I love, I have to have a shout out to all your teachers that post on Teachers Pay Teachers because that is an amazing site.
It is. It is. Why reinvent the
Some
wheel?
I know. There are some
I
great
love it.
people out there that they put some, amazing graphics together. And I was able to buy a packet that had really cool body, the body and the inside organs and stuff for different parts. And you could write the definitions in there. That helps him.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So you do what you got to do to
Yep.
help them learn.
Mm. That's all. It's
So,
the key is learning.
mhm.
Um, with that being said, to kinda get back that's awesome. Tell him congratulations, and you're doing a phenomenal job as being a learning coach because that's hard, because now you
Yeah.
have to put your parent mentality aside and put on a teacher mentality, and
Mhm.
that's hard because sometimes you're like, "Well, I told you, now you just gotta make the error," which is it's
Mhm.
difficult. It's very,
Yeah.
very difficult. Um, with that being said, I know that again, I just wanna make it clear before we move on to the IDEA,
Mhm.
is that an educational diagnosis is the disability of autism, for example, impacts the student learning in a normal
Mhm.
classroom. So it's that disability. How bad does it
Mhm.
affect them? Because
Uh,
as you state, huh?
And it's not just it's I mean, for instance, for us, we're talking autism, but it
Mhm.
also qualifies for things like ADHD, sensory
Mhm.
processing disorder. There's actually 13 different categories
Exactly.
that IDEA uh, puts or helps lists, and their categories there.
Mhm.
When you look at the federal, it's kind of a broad
Broad.
definition,
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
broad.
Mhm.
And that's where I was shocked to understand that, okay, so I just moved from South Carolina to Tennessee, and my IEP can change because the definitions, IEP, yes, individualized education plan, sorry, can change because the definition of autism spectrum disorder in South Carolina, for South Carolina's I.D.E.A. can be different from that of Tennessee,
Mhm.
which I can actually see a little bit of the differentiation, because of just even the format.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things I thought was very interesting. So in South Carolina, you don't necessarily have to. There's nothing on your IEP that says whether or not you plan on graduating with a regular diploma or a different tract. And I actually, this thing came up when I was doing
Well,
the
in
online
Tennessee or South Carolina?
in Tennessee.
Okay, because
They
South
wanted to
Carolina has it
know.
when they turn 13.
Well,
They has to
my
turn 13 first. So in the
oh,
life of
see,
the IEP, it has to be 13. It's called a transition and not a school IEP. So
oh,
transition of 13, you actually
mhm.
have to put if they're on a non-credential certification or a diploma track. It's when they turn 13 and up.
Well, see, I didn't know that. And I kept getting asked in Tennessee, "Well, what track are you going?" I'm like, "Oh, um,
Yeah.
he's 6th grade."
I
You
if
know?
yeah, if he's not 13 in the life of the IEP, they're gonna keep him school age. So it's normally 6 to 12 is school age.
Okay, so, hey, I just learned something new even on the podcast.
Sorry. Sorry.
There's no, that's great because how many of you out there know that there's a different between the
School
school age
age and the transition. Mhm,
and your IEP?
mhm. And
So
then
many different things
really
depend on
fun
your age.
fact yep, really fun fact, the state of South Carolina has adopted a new diploma track. I know this is a little off track, but I know that the United States is moving away from accepting GEDs. So what
Mhm,
does that mean for our students?
right.
So the state of South Carolina actually said, "Hey, we got your back. You can have a diploma track or a, um, credential diploma,"
Mhm,
meaning they say, okay, you're on a modified curriculum, but you sat through all these four Englishes. You have sat
mhm,
through everything a high schooler needs to sit through. We're still going to give you a diploma. And then you have your certification of attendance, which
mhm,
typically is your lower disabilities.
mhm,
But now the state's saying, okay, now you're not just getting your GED, you're actually getting a,
mhm.
a diploma credit. But
Right, which
it's
helps
right.
then the transition into jobs. I
Mhm.
know now
Mhm.
in the state of Tennessee, not knowing exactly where I was lying, I'm still learning here. And if you move across state lines, you're gonna have to learn all the ins and outs of what is
Mhm.
offered in each different
Different
state.
state. Mhm.
As far as the, your education diagnosis, it's not a
Right.
given that you're going to get all the services you need. I mean, you very much want to get that medical diagnosis, um, because that label is going to help you get the services you
This is
need.
great. Mhm.
And those services are a way to help your child as well as even your family learn how to function.
Mhm.
I mean, this is just day to
Mhm.
day function stuff.
Yeah.
And then as you get into the educational side, there's different things that you have to learn there as to then, okay, once they get out of school.
Right.
So, I mean, this is unfortunately, you got to think of a long ways down the line. I mean, that's one of the things that actually kind of shocked me. I wasn't ready to hear that, it kind of, shocked me out of my, I don't know if it, I just had never thought of it until when we were in the diagnosis when, they came out and after they, analyzed and everything, they came and said, "Yes, your child is autistic on the spectrum, but they will be able to, he will be able to live on his own and function in society." And I was like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
Well, what? Oh, I had never even thought that he wouldn't be able to, and didn't understand, even at that medical side of it, there are those who have been told that they may not be able to
Mhm.
live on their own.
Yeah, I used to
Um,
teach them.
so when you get that diagnosis, all sorts of feelings come forth, and then from there, you come forth with your medical diagnosis, then you've got to go to the school and you've got to find that educational diagnosis.
Right.
And so, and it's a lot of paperwork.
It is a lot
Um,
of paperwork. It is.
and there's, one of the best things I think is, and one of the things that I guess I want everybody to know is you're not in this alone.
No.
Um, your teachers are a good source. They're there to help you.
Psychologist.
Yes, your psychologist, your school psychologist is definitely somebody you want to get to know.
Us teachers still rely
Yes. Yes. And, having emails that go back and forth a lot of times between yourself, copy your teacher in, copy the
on them.
sped teacher, a special education teacher.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I For some reason they have changed it to sped on the in the outside of the classroom to kind of, you know, didn't instead of saying special education,
Yeah, we just call
um,
it SPED.
to
Yeah,
help with the stigma, yeah, that comes with it. Um,
that's constantly changing.
but yeah, I mean it's hard because it is technically it's a disability. We
Technically.
just gotta come to grips with that.
Right, and that's when you need the label. This is appropriate time
Mhm,
to have the label because this is how you're
mhm,
going to get your appropriate services. Now, if you're out in the world, nobody needs to know. You know,
mm-mm,
unless you want them to know to help them however get the service, but sometimes a label actually helps them get the
mhm,
services, and that's all it is.
mhm,
Nobody likes the stigma that comes with it. But
mhm.
yet again, we say it every podcast. When you meet a child with autism, you only meet one
One
child
child
with
with
autism.
autism.
They're all different. So you never know who does and who
Mhm,
doesn't. With that being said, teachers and the school environment and or maybe a medical environment, they do need that label. They do
mhm,
need it. So I suggest if you have a nonverbal child who can't talk, I suggest maybe putting something on your car or your windows to let fire marshals, hey, my child's nonverbal, so if they run away from you or
mhm,
don't respond, it's
mhm,
because of this and this. And that's when it's appropriate to
mhm.
have those labels, not the
Right.
stigma or the dogma that comes with
Mhm.
the label.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
There
so
are people that have to know, that need to know that when they're taking care of your child or doing anything that, things might happen, they may not respond the normal
mhm,
way. I mean,
mhm,
we have, one of the reasons that, I was thinking about this earlier, we have a, handicap parking pass.
right.
We call it our magic parking pass.
The
That thing has
magical
been a lifesaver.
saver. Oh yeah.
And you might think, okay, are they abusing the system because they have one? No, no, actually, it's a safety thing because my
Mhm.
son elopes.
Mhm.
Elopement is when they just run.
Yep, just run.
Now, some people have instances where elopement, the child will just take off from the house at any given time. Um, we have personally decided, and for our household, we have a security system that lets us know what doors are being opened for that reason. Um, my handicap parking space, the reason we've got that is because my son will just randomly start. He loves animals, and he is more interested in the bird in the parking lot than the
what's
car
around him. Right.
that's
Right.
coming down towards him. And so having that handicap parking pass and being able to say, it's a wonderful thing. I really didn't notice until I had that. Um, that there are the sidewalk, lines that are painted in the parking lot. Well, I can say, follow the lines.
Yep.
Make sure you're in the lined path. Make sure you're in the yellow path. Well,
Mhm.
for him, that's a visual to
Yep.
help him do what he's supposed to.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm using that handicap parking spot and those things because it helps him keep him safe.
Safe. Right. Exactly. And so you've picked up on different modifications, accommodations
Mhm,
within your own family. But how do we get this back into the classroom? And this is where IDEA comes in. This
mhm,
is where the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It
mhm,
first began in 1975. It was a
mhm.
different name. I think it was ADA, American Disability Act.
Well,
But
no,
it
the ADA is
no,
still for
it's
some
still
or
different.
other things.
Oh, I cannot remember, but it was a different
Yeah.
name in
Mhm,
1975. And
mhm,
over time, it has progressed into what it is today.
mhm.
Okay. A lot of people, there it is. And so it's a
It's
federal education law. Okay. So
yes.
kids with disabilities who can qualify can get special education or related services from public schools.
Mhm,
Okay. So a lot of people confuse IDA with FAPE, which is
mhm.
free appropriate public education. So you have to think that IDA is this big umbrella, and then you have FAPE underneath it.
Beneath it. Right.
Okay. So once you get this educational diagnosis, guess what? You now have the right, and the IDA gives you the parents' rights for
Mhm.
your child with disabilities or your
Right.
child with disabilities rights. These are
Mhm.
things that we cannot infringe upon. You
Right.
can't take it away from them. You have to follow by these laws.
Mhm.
If some of you guys have already been through this, you sit on an IEP meeting and you have what's called procedural safeguards. Okay.
Yes.
And so when you sit on, these are your short little summarized rules that the
Yep,
school
it's about
can't
yay thick,
fix.
about what, 25, 30 pages stapled
Yes,
together?
it is all the laws that what
Mhm.
the school from the IDA cannot infringe upon. They
Right.
cannot take your right. They can't say, "Oh, no, sorry, yeah, he has autism, but we didn't do the right process,
Mhm.
can't no,
Yeah. No.
no."
Well,
So with go ahead.
and that's where you have to do things like I have to make sure that, that I tell the, uh, the teachers and stuff about his elopement.
That's where the LARE comes in. I'm gonna
Yes.
interrupt.
Yes.
Chad, I am so sorry that you went through that. Um, but with the IDA and what I talked about the LRE, it has changed. Now the way you're talking, it sounds like you should have been in resource, that in between subject, which is now what the IDA revised is saying, no, you cannot just go from regular ed to special ed. There is an in between, trying to bridge that gap between the
Mhm.
two so you don't have to go what you went through, Chad. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
some of the things that we went through as kids. Um, Thankfully, they've changed to where our kids don't have to go through the same process.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, and that's where this IDEA and comes into play and allows us to get the things we need for our children.
Mm-hmm.
Allows us to say, and that's one of the most important things we can do is say, be present,
Yeah.
be forthcoming with all the details
Yep.
of what's going on. Here's the medical diagnosis. Here's this diagnosis. Here's this diagnosis. But I am finding that this, and this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's one thing I was always, very much a parent of, okay, is he in a situation, my son was bullied in a brick and mortar school, and I was scared to death
Right.
that he was going to elope. And the school that he was at just backed up to woods. And
Mm.
there was some woods, but then there were some areas where, it could get into a normal road and,
It is
God.
potentially dangerous.
Yeah, it was, and so that's the kinda things you gotta watch out for, and So that elopement is important to tell them so that they can know that, okay, when they're out to recess, we pay special attention to make sure that something,
Mhm.
that we have eyes on them so they don't
Mhm.
elope.
Exactly.
If
Exactly.
there's issues with handwriting, if there's issues with, pragmatic speech or what have you,
Right.
um, that's what you have to be able to tell. That's what the testing is for in order
Exactly.
for you to get all the services you need.
Right. So you're doing the one thing that the IDA says you have the right to do. IDA says you have the right to bring this up to a teacher or a psychologist or an admin or a school official saying, hey, I require an evaluation process. Sit down
Mhm,
and evaluate my child. And with
mhm,
that, you can go to apa.org, Advocacy Education, IDA. It actually gives you these resources, provides
mhm.
you with the advocacy, which is can be free
That's
to you from
mhm, that
I.D.E.A.
one,
You
yeah,
okay?
that one is the, American Psyche hold on, a Psychological Association. I had a printout
Yep,
from there. One of
yep.
my favorite things, though, is about the IDEA. There is the Department of Education funds
Mhm,
specific,
mhm,
centers, one
mhm.
center for each state, um, that will give you I'm looking at my binder because, see, I went to one of those, and they gave me this binder,
Yep,
and they gave me all this information about, say I'm trying to get it to the camera here, exactly what it is, some, things that I could fill out, to look at into, a whole entire what the No Child Left Behind Act was, um,
mhm.
what a 504 was, what an IEP was, all that kind of information, just, I mean, and like a huge thing about
Right.
IEP. But this was available at my, parent resource
That's awesome.
center.
That's awesome.
And I think there's a website that we had as Centers for, um, it's a parent training and resource center.
Mhm.
And there's a website that gives you access where you can, uh, it's an overall website that
Mhm.
gives you, a map and a listing where you can go to your state to see where that particular office is.
Correct.
Um, and that will give you access, and regardless of whether you're near that office or not, go to the state website and get the information. So that, will give you, the access to find that different, definition for autism
Yep.
for your state.
Right.
That's different from the state next door or the
Exactly.
state you might
And
have
it
moved from.
will. And it can give you that resource for an advocate. And to some of those who don't know what an advocate is, it pretty much is a person who knows the ins and the outs of IDA, knows the ins and the outs of an IEP, and knows the rights and stands up for the parents' rights and the child's rights against the
Mhm,
school board. And it's free. You're allowed to have one at every single IEP if you want.
mhm,
So what you can worry about is, okay, my academic goals or the academic goals for my student, while my advocate fights for to make sure my voice is heard and make sure we come to an agreement.
mhm.
So that's some of the advocacy that you need too, because sometimes
Yes.
having these advocacies, they can also be like, okay, go here, here, and here for a resource. If your
Mhm.
child is struggling and having something nightmares at night and you don't know where to turn to, here
Exactly.
we go. Or what you were saying with the different definitions of the state lines, because there
Mhm.
is not a one definition
I
of
wish there was a federal
autism.
definition, but
Right. There's a general, but not one that every state follows to a
Mhm.
T. And that's
Right.
frustrating.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
you have
frustrating.
the overall
Mhm.
federal act, but
Right.
then individual states still have the right to,
Mhm.
um, give their definition and what they, can or willing to do.
Do, right, what they can and not offer.
Yeah.
So with that, IDA also, I'd want to make this clear. I hope everybody knows this. Um, doesn't matter if your child has an education diagnosis, they can receive um resources from the age of 3, so before they even get into the school
Right.
system, all the way to
Mhm.
age 21.
Mhm.
Some of my kiddos, if the parents may get their rights when the child turns 18,
Right.
have to say, yes, I want my child going until they're 21.
Right.
Good.
Right.
Now they're a senior, but we always call them super seniors because,
Right.
hey, you're coming back to school to learn more. We encourage it.
Mhm.
So I do have some students who are almost 20, 21 in my classroom.
Right.
But they offer that. So wait, hold on. I said age 3. Wait, but in school age kindergarten? Yes, but guess what?
There are pre-K departments.
There's pre-K, and you can go to your school saying, "Hey, my child's been diagnosed with this. I want evaluation at age 3, age 4," and you can
Mhm.
go ahead and get that diagnosis and that medical diagnosis, not medical, educational
Mhm.
diagnosis, and start getting your free and appropriate education
Yeah, to help
and
them.
resources what you need. That means speech
Mhm.
because as Jessica, just you guys know, we actually do talk about these podcasts before we get here,
Yes.
because practice makes perfect. But
Yeah.
Jessica, you actually mentioned prior to this talking about how school offers Medicaid. Can you go in a little more depth about that?
Well, your Medicaid, if you have Medicaid, it's not actually in depending on the state that you live in. Either your Medicaid program, which of course is based on your income, um, or if you have a state that has the ability of
Mm-hmm.
having TEFRA,
Mm-hmm.
you
I'm
can
sorry, I'm
get
going to
it's
interrupt real quick. Paul Baker goes, "Are these resources available for homeschools?" Yes,
yes.
because even if you're homeschooled,
Hmm.
it's just like sports. What you have to do is whatever school you're zoned for in that county, in that school
Hmm.
district, you have to go to the special services board and get them to request the evaluation and talk about what can be offered at home, even if they're homeschooled.
Right.
So you do
The
have
school
those
that
resources.
Yeah, the school that we are in is a virtual online school, and so the recent testing that we because you can request the testing to be redone every 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and so Curtis came up to that point, and so I said, yes, please, let's get this testing done. And so one of the tests they had to do, he was able to actually, I was thought it was really neat. He did his speech test online. He did his OT test online. They just sent us the paperwork, and he had to have the webcam point down to watch him how he wrote. And then I sent the paperwork back. But the achievement testing and IQ testing, um, oh, that is amazing, Terry.
Amazing.
And hi, Terry. I have to say hi. Terry is a high school friend of mine. So thank you so
Oh,
much for watching.
yes.
Pre-K can be amazing. Curtis didn't have pre-K, but we didn't know at the time. But anyway, going through those programs, but also when you go through the IQ testing and the achievement testing, that has to be administered by a school psychologist. And
Mm-hmm.
so what happened was they called me up, and a school psychologist from the district here met us at the public library
Mm-hmm.
and reserved a room. And Curtis went in there and he did his achievement testing and his IQ testing
Right.
through with a school psychologist, a certified school psychologist. And so that testing had to be done, which was great. He was able to get that here soon. I get those
Right.
results.
Good.
So I'm actually excited to see
I'm excited.
what happens with that. But all you get those tests and you can achieve those services.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I've just found out that the so if you have a TEFRA program, which TEFRA is for autism and
Mm-hmm.
other disabilities, specific for that, or if you just qualify for Medicaid and you have a special needs student, make sure you are informing your insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we currently had to go through the insurance process with the healthcare.gov. Oh, that's so lovely.
All
Anyway,
right.
that process put my children into the pool for Medicaid,
Mm-hmm.
which then, because Curtis is special needs, I have to then make sure that he and I, called the insurance, was put in touch with caseworkers. And one of my caseworkers said, I'm going to send this form to you. Make sure that to sign, to make sure we have a copy of his IEP, because whatever he is getting on his IEP, or is
Mhm.
qualified for on his IEP, we'll make sure we need to make sure that he's getting those services, or we need to take him out and,
Mhm.
give him those services otherwise.
Exactly.
So there is a way to cover these services. So in this instance, yes, that medical diagnosis, that label, that educational diagnosis, that label is important
Because
to get
insurance
those
is gonna
services.
ask about that Education Act or that
Mhm,
how it impacts. Kinda back
'cause
it up a little bit really
mhm,
quick. For viewers who don't have the homeschool, I want them to understand that there are 3 different types of homeschooling. You have
mhm,
tier 1, which is the actual online schooling, and this is how it's still set up like a brick and mortar,
mhm,
kind of hierarchy, but it's online. Then you
right,
have the second homeschooling, which is a mix, and you actually go to somebody else's house with an actual professor, and they actually homeschool, and you can do the different. And then your third type is where you yourself teach them. So with
mhm,
yours, when you're talking about the getting the educational resources, it would be because you would go to your psychologist.
mhm.
If
I
you're
would be
in
a tier
this
1.
Right, you'd be tier 1. So, but if you're in
Mhm,
tier 2 or tier 3, I highly recommend you going to the special services within your
mhm,
district, and they can steer you in a better direction because
right,
they're still getting a public education in a lot of ways. So
mhm,
maybe they can steer you or be able to get you that advocate that you're looking for, Paul. So I just want to kind of make that clear because
right,
tier 1, and then I was talking about tier 2, tier 3, because my
right,
husband was homeschooled, but he didn't have special needs, but he was homeschooled, but he was homeschooled on tier 3. His
right,
mom taught him.
right.
So
My
I just wanted to
cousins
make
were
that clear.
my
So,
cousins were, and, my aunt, taught them, and then now they're actually teaching their own children. But I chose to stay within the tier 1,
mhm,
because I knew that Curtis needed those services. Plus, I also knew that my daughter needed gifted and talented,
right.
and so that was helpful to them.
Yep.
So,
Right.
it's and that, of course, is always up to you as a parent, and it
Fair.
doesn't
Mhm.
matter whether you're able to, if brick and mortar works for you, that's great.
Great.
That's perfect. In a way, I wish that brick and mortar would have worked for my kid, but, I wasn't that fortunate. But the way that we're doing school now works for us. That's a family choice. It's
To see
personal.
him grow within that first year was
Mhm,
phenomenal. Like, it was day and night, just because I
mhm.
remember catching the tail end of the brick and
Oof.
mortar and then began this process with you on
Oh
the
my goodness.
online, telling it like, I'm
Yeah.
telling if you
So,
know this kid, it is day and night between those 2. So I
mhm.
think you made the phenomenal right choice, and I
And
know he's getting the best he could ever get out of
yeah, and
education.
it was tough making that decision.
I bet.
So, I'm right there with you, and we both advocate, do what's right for your child.
Mhm, mhm.
And whatever works for you is what works for you and for your child, because when you've seen one child with autism, you've seen one child with autism.
What? What?
It's a spectrum.
Good.
Many different things work for each individual child. So,
Exactly.
but just know that there are advocates out there for you to
Mhm.
help you, that you do have the right to have education, and that word appropriate is in there, free and appropriate. So we can't ask the moon. Um, we do have to be nice.
Right, and it does state that. I'm glad you brought that up because the IDA even says, "Hey, free appropriate education is not to get them into university of this big one, or it's not to say, hey, I want my kid in this program and a spot reserved on the sports team because he has special." It's not that. It's for him to get the modifications and the accommodations so he can access the curriculum and access learning
Mhm,
at a pace that he needs to learn at. And
Right.
so that's what free and appropriate public education means. It also states that free and appropriate education is not punishment. It's not to
Right.
just go, oh, here, have fun. No, they're going to have to provide you these
Mhm.
services. You as a parent have the right to say, excuse me, you said he was supposed to get a speech for an hour. For 2 weeks now, he hasn't had a speech for an hour. That's not free and appropriate education.
Yeah.
And you
What's
have
going
the
on here?
right to bring it up to the teacher. You have the right. Now, we
Mhm.
don't say go straight to the school board. There is a hierarchy within the school.
Mm.
And I'm, as a
Yeah.
teacher, I absolutely love it when my parents go, hey, I just caught this. What's going on? They ask me what's going on because I'm like,
Mhm.
I know he's supposed to get it one per week. Right now, the sub is or the speech therapist is extremely sick. She's going to end up making it up. Thank you for coming to
Right.
me because now I can explain this to you. Now I can tell you
Mhm.
it's not always the oh, you forgot
Yeah.
about my child. You're violating my rights. No.
No,
There's a
yes,
hierarchy. So before you go straight to the
step by step,
superintendent or
by
the
step, by
admin,
step.
always,
Yes.
always ask the teacher. And I
Mhm.
promise you, you're gonna catch more respect and more
Mhm.
openness with your parent or
Right.
the teacher with that. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that all of our teachers are like this, but I pray that
Yeah.
all of them are.
Yes. Always go step
So
by step. If you have a problem, talk to the teacher first, and if the teacher doesn't listen, go to the next
A
step.
which is admin,
Mhm.
and then from
Mhm.
there, you go to the superintendent or the special services, yep.
Yeah. I mean, I
So,
only had
admin and
to
special services are like this.
Mhm. Yeah, I only
So,
had to go to that top tier, 2 or 3 times, and then
2 or 3
I would
times. With the same issue, that was the worst part,
Mhm.
with the same issue.
Mhm.
That bothered me.
But yeah. We
Um,
all have our times that things are not
we No, we do, and so with
Mhm.
I.D.E.A, there is qualification. So let's say you do have that educational diagnosis. To qualify underneath I.D.E.A and get that free appropriate education, your child must have a disability and need special education because of it. And
Right,
if your child is eligible, you're going to be working with the school team to develop an IEP, which is an
right.
individual education plan. And then I.D.E.A gives you a say in your child's education and many important rights. So you're going to
Right.
want those rights.
Mhm.
Related services that's going to be underneath that,
Mhm.
accommodations or assistive technology. So, for example, if
Right.
your child is nonverbal, free and appropriate education is accessing that assistive technology, so you're gonna
Exactly.
able to have a ways of having modes of communication. And
Mhm.
guess what? The school district and you have to determine, okay, am I
What
paying for it? Are we
can
halfway paying for it? It all depends
Mhm.
on what school district you are, because some of them do require some parents to pay some of it as
Right,
well as, but if you're in a more funded district,
right.
they're gonna be, okay, we're going to go ahead and pay for it. Don't worry about it. So it depends on which district. So I don't want to say the district is going to pay for some of this assistive technology,
Mhm.
but that's what an IEP team is for. And if
Yeah,
you're,
that's what you're gonna
I
pay attention.
suggest if you're talking about assistive technology and some of these financial, I suggest you have an advocate with you,
Right.
because they're going to
Oh,
be able to fight
exactly.
some of these things that you may not know. And technically your free lawyer in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um,
That and that free lawyer is in air quotes for
yes,
those of
air quotes,
air
because
quotes
they
on
didn't
that.
go to school
But
for it now.
yeah,
But
now we did have a nice graphic up there, and that, I actually found on understood.org.
awesome.
And that actually I found that site to be very eye-opening, had a lot of information, and it was put in terms that you could understand. There were a lot of links, and I like the fact that at the bottom of every article, it told a little bit about the author, but it also told of somebody who reviewed it,
Right,
who had credentials that you knew was, they were checking their information. So
right.
links will be in our show notes at myspectrumlife.com. So make sure and check that out. Um, now, if you have any questions that you want, topics or anything that you want us to talk about, please send us an email to
Mhm,
info@myspectrumlife.com.
mhm,
Um, plus, we'd like to hear from you, and make sure that if you're here tonight on, in the chat room and everything, via YouTube, give us a thumbs up and subscribe, to this YouTube channel. Give us and on Facebook, we're on My Spectrum Life, facebook.com/My Spectrum Life. We're on Instagram, My Spectrum Life on Instagram as well, and Twitter is My Spectrum Life 1. But go ahead and on any of those platforms that you are on, subscribe, watch, follow, because that lets us know that people are listening. They're liking the information they're getting. And we just wanted to cover, in the first 3 episodes, kind of give our background and cover some of the meat that you
Yeah.
kind of gotta know.
Yep.
Now we can open it up, and there are so many different things that we can talk about. And we are so open to and excited to be able to talk about so many more topics.
Mm.
So, with that being said, please um, drop us a line and let us know what you might want to talk about. When are we going to do this again, Kelsey?
Next one's gonna be on March 16th, 7 p.m. Central Time and 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
All right, so that's March 16th will be our next podcast. We're planning on going every other week through March, but
Mhm.
then because April is our Autism Awareness Month, we're going to go every week in April and see how that goes. So, and one of the big things we're trying to think and figure out is, you want us to, do you want this information coming to you every week? So if you do, let us know. Drop us a line. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Always, always.
So,
If my students are listening, I want to just give you a shout out and say thank you, because I actually do encourage my students
mhm,
to watch, because it's a form of advocacy for themselves, because I want them to know, like, look, you're going to want to know some of these resources to fight for
right.
yourself and your rights.
Mhm.
With that being said, I know that you guys do not have email. You can always tell me in the classroom. Um,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's okay. Yes, Jennifer, that is a great topic. It says, she says, can y'all talk about kids who got a diagnosis later on, say after 9, after many docs not seeing enough reasons to diagnose? Oh, goodness.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. We will do some research and we will have some more information for that, about that for you on an upcoming episode. Um, I was in the same boat because we did not get diagnosed until 7.
That's
So
gonna
there
be
are
your
many
one.
there are some that don't get diagnosed until much later, and how in the
Yeah.
world do you
How do you
then
play
go
catch
from.
up in a lot of ways?
Yes, that's
Mhm,
one of the things that I felt
mhm.
I was playing was catch up. And then also, you're coming with an older child, and sometimes a lot of services are aimed at younger ages. And so how to find all those services. So yes, that will be a topic.
That
Thank
is,
you
that's
so much for
thank you
that
so much.
suggestion, Jennifer. All righty. Well, I think that about does it for tonight. Anything else that you can think of there, Kelsey?
I just say thank you for attending and thank you for commenting, and I absolutely love these live comments and feedback.
Oh, yes.
I enjoy it. Again, the next Spectrum Life will be on March 16th, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes, then we would so much love for you to be there and be in the chat room and interact with us. So, from Kelsey and I here, we say good night, good morning, or see you later. Thanks for being with us tonight. Goodbye, everyone.